So I'm happy to introduce Principal Wolff, and he's here beginning, no, not beginning, you're in your second term. I won't even get into dates. Oh, okay, so he's going to be starting his second term, and of course he's a distinguished history professor. And what I found unique when I hear this is he still teaches in the department, in the history department. So he's not only the principal, but he has teaching responsibilities, which I think is really neat, actually, because it obviously keeps you close to the students. And he specializes in British cultural history, and he's maybe your most recent book is The Global History of History. Very good. The Global History of History. I think that's neat. I'm going to read that. I haven't read it yet. We've had 20 principals here at Queen's, but he's the third one that's been alumni. So he's alumni, and you are a parent also, a Queen's parent. Yeah. So alumni, teaches, and a parent. So I mean, I think he's well grounded in all the things that go on here at Queen's, and I think we can. It's really great because we can relate to. He can relate to our experience, and we can relate to his experience. Member of the Royal Historical Society, Royal Society of Canada, and two things, has his own radio show on CFRC, which is kind of cool, called Dark Glasses. And for many of you know, but if you don't yet, follow him on Twitter, because he's got over 7,000 followers on Twitter, and you did a little tweet at lunchtime, I believe. So he's always doing that, and that's great. And just to make him a little more human, a favorite movie, 12 Angry Men, which is one of my favorite.
Boy, you did your homework.
Right, and where's my? I got a book for him. Who's Sidney? Do you know this book? Sidney Lumet, Making Movies.
I did not.
I'll give that to you.
Well,
so the director of 12 Angry Men is Sidney Lumet, and Sidney's written this book. It's absolutely brilliant around
and The Verdict and the whole bunch.
Yeah, so he's that, and one of his favorite groups is Steely Dan, which I think is just cool. So that's great.
So where's the album to present?
Yeah, I was going to play some Steely Dan from my iPod, but I didn't have that ready. Sorry, and he's a big mystery. Detective mystery novel reader. And so without any further ado, I present to you Principal Daniel Wolff.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, George. That's enough about me. Let me talk about me. And thank you also for the commercial. Can you hear me all back there? Is this on? Okay, good. Thank you also for the commercial endorsement for my book. I will happily provide the International Standard Book number for anybody who wishes to order it. Actually, I just finished having my 4th year in graduate seminar in historiography reading it, so though they mostly bought used copies, so I'm not in a conflict of interest. Anyway, it's delightful to be with you today. This is a little different a venue than we've had in the past. But as you can well imagine, even though classes actually ended yesterday, this is a very, very busy time in the Queen's calendar. So let me take a few minutes to bring you up to speed with some news from campus before taking a few of your questions. I'd like to start with an update on the initiative campaign, which continues to move along with great momentum. And as we near the end of the fiscal year on April the 30th, very pleased to tell you that we have reached and exceeded our annual fundraising target of $60 million. Which I think is good. And that has actually allowed us to break through the $400 million mark as we close in on our $500 million goal, which we'd like to not just reach, but exceed sometime in 2016. Now, I'm sure you have all heard some of the most recent exciting campaign news about one particular gift. Okay. Last month, Queen's alumnus Stu Lang, who was once a star player on the Gales and went on to play with the CFL, stepped up to become the lead donor on the project to revitalize Richardson Stadium. Revitalize is a little bit of a euphemism. It basically means build a new stadium. To replace the temporary stadium that went up in 1971. Never let anybody put you in a temporary building. Anyway, Stu has pledged $10 million towards that project. It's a gift that will allow us to undertake a special part of the overall campaign over the next couple of months to raise the rest of the $25 million we will need to modernize the stadium. So this is by no means a done deal, but I do think that if things unfold as they should over the next few months, we would ideally be able to break ground over the course of the next academic year, the 2014-15 academic year, with a view to having a stadium open for the 2016 fall season. Now, the timing of the 2016 fall season is not accidental. Because, I'm sure most of you know this by now, because I've talked almost incessantly about this since I've been here. 2016-17 is the academic year that will mark our 175th anniversary. We have an advisory committee in place to plan the anniversary. It's chaired by long-serving MP and former Speaker of the House, Peter Milliken. And the executive committee that is doing the actual nuts and bolts of the work, ably assisted this year, I might say, by our friend Rico Garcia, is being chaired by former Dean of Health Sciences, David Walker. So the committee meets regularly, both the executive and the advisory committee, they meet regularly to consider how we will mark this milestone. Now, it's also interesting that the 2016-17 Queen's milestone is sandwiched right in between two other significant Canadian history milestones. Of course, 2015 marks the bicentennial of the birth of Sir John A. Macdonald. And 2017, of course, is the 150th anniversary of Canada, which for those of us who remember the centennial with some clarity seems like, how did we get? What happened? So anyway, we've got a lot to look forward to over the next 3 or 4 years. Let me talk a little bit about planning. And there's been a lot of that over the last few years. We had the Senate Academic Plan, the Senate Strategic Research Plan, and now we have the 5-year strategic framework. This was not a Senate, but a Board of Trustees document, and we launched it after last month's trustees meeting, beginning of March. So this is a document which is very, very short. I encourage you to have a look at it on the website. And it's intended to guide our decision-making over the next 5 years as we advance our vision of the university, which is to be Canada's quintessential balanced academy. And balanced academy has become sort of my little 2-word mantra over the last few years. And by that I mean a university that provides a first-class student learning experience within a research-intensive environment. It's also balanced between the in-classroom experience that we offer our students, the formal education, and that out-of-classroom experience, the clubs, the student government, the societies, the philanthropical activities, all of which are very much part of the special sauce that makes Queen's, in my view, very, very different from every other university that I've worked at. So the strategic framework will also help guide our goal of long-term financial sustainability. The framework identifies a number of goals in key areas, and it outlines a set of performance metrics to help gauge the university's progress over the next few years. And I and my colleagues in the senior administration will be updating the trustees and the larger community on a regular basis on our progress. And again, the framework will serve as something of an umbrella or a capstone for all those other planning documents, the academic plan, the strategic research plan, and our new activity-based budget model, which some of you will have read about in my last column in the Queen's Alumni Review. We also have the Queen's strategic mandate statement, which is essentially a contract between us and the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, which for those of you outside Ontario is the ministry in the Ontario government that provides a significant part of our funding, though less significant a part than it once was in a few of our days back when. But notwithstanding that, we still get a good 40% of our revenues on a per student basis from the Ontario government. And one of the exercises we've been through with them and all the other universities and all the colleges in the province is this mandate statement exercise. We will have more to say about that when that's finalized. I'm feeling reasonably bullish about how we will end up. The purpose of the province in doing this is to try to introduce a little more differentiation among the various universities so that we don't have 20 universities trying to be University of Toronto or indeed trying to be Queen's. The other big planning document that has come to fruition is the Campus Master Plan. And after nearly a year and a half of study and consultation, the board passed this at the March meeting, and this plan will guide the university's physical and spatial growth over the next 10 to 15 years, but also has a horizon significantly longer, looking 30, 40 years out, and we'll have to update it periodically because like a weather forecast, which this winter is perhaps a bad analogy, the further out you look, the less reliable it is. So we will have to update this on a regular basis. But the goal is to make sure that all campus improvements and development projects, acquisitions, support our academic mission. We also want to be mindful of continually working to enhance the campus experience while promoting the sound management of our facilities and our resources. Keeping in a physical planning vein, you may have noticed if you've been down by the lake or near Matheson Field, as it now is, construction is currently underway on 2 new residence buildings set to open on Stewart Street and Albert Street in the fall of 2015. One of those residences, the one that will be right next to Leggett Hall, will be called Smith Hall, after the late Principal David Smith, and that's officially been approved by the board. We still haven't decided on a name for the second residence, but we're getting close. We also, and I hope some of you will sometime have an opportunity to see this, have done significant renovations to Ellis Hall. We opened a number of active learning classrooms on the 3rd floor, and our first groups of students began taking courses there in January. And the rooms include design features like learning pods, not iPods, pods, which encourage collaborative work and learning, as well as tools like whiteboards to promote brainstorming and activity. So it's a very, very different approach to education. I know from talking to one of the professors who teaches in there regularly, Jonathan Rose, whom some of you will know, that it's just completely changed the feel for him of something like a 3-hour once-a-week lecture where the students just get up and go to the whiteboard on the spur of the moment and do some of their creative activity. So it's just very, very, very different from your conventional sage on the stage lecturing of the sort that I'm doing right now. And Saving the pièce de résistance for last, of course, finally, the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts. It has been so exciting to watch this building coming to life over the last couple of years. The center is very near completion on the Kingston waterfront. You don't even have to wear a hard hat when you're in there anymore. It's a remarkable new space designed by the internationally renowned architecture firm Snow-Hetta, which is also responsible for the Oslo Opera House and the redesign of Times Square in New York. The facility will provide us with a superior concert hall, a rehearsal hall, which will be a small replica of the concert hall, right down to an acoustic replica, including the same wood that's in the main concert hall, so that groups and orchestras and chamber music ensembles practicing there will be able to replicate exactly the acoustic sound of the big hall. But it's also an academic facility. It will have a lot of very, very bright classrooms and workspaces for our students and faculty in film and media, music, drama, and visual art. While the Isabel, and I suspect it's probably a matter of time before it gets known simply as the Is, will open formally in September, we'll be announcing the performance season in May. So I hope you'll be able to join us at some of those shows. And speaking of the Baders, I'm very pleased to tell you, if you don't already know, that Alfred and Isabel Bader are in Kingston this weekend, along with their son Daniel, who's a current member of the Board of Trustees. Alfred and Isabel are being honored at the Alumni Awards Gala later this evening, where they will be receiving the Alumni Achievement Award from the QUAA. They had a tour of the Isabel Bader Center yesterday afternoon, and I think it's fair to say that they were thrilled. Later this month, Alfred will be celebrating his 90th birthday, and we're so very pleased that he felt in good enough health to pay us a visit at this time. Julie and I had tea with the Baders yesterday afternoon, and that was a lovely opportunity on a number of fronts. First of all, one of the things that Dr. Bader has recently done is he has a very, very soft spot in his experience for two people who made his own education possible when he was here as a student in the 40s. One, of course, is the famous registrar Jean Royce. The other is my last but 10 predecessor, Principal Robert Wallace. And a little while back, Alfred, I think, gave Judith Brown a call and said, and had realized that he hadn't done anything to commemorate Principal Wallace. And so we had a little bit of a discussion with Student Affairs, and one of the most appropriate things we thought to do with that, I want to say latest gift, except it isn't the latest gift, but that recent gift was to develop a scholarship for an international refugee student. And the first of those students is here this year, and she met with Alfred yesterday, and she also got, and Alfred got to meet with Principal Wallace's granddaughter, Sue Waywell, who's a local Kingston accountant. And so it was a lovely little cross-generational meeting. So let me come to homecoming. And this is actually the first year that I've been able to talk about homecoming as having occurred in the past rather than when is it going to come back, Principal. Our alumni play a hugely important role in fostering the Queen's spirit, and we were very pleased that homecoming went off this fall with relatively few hitches. And you've heard that it will be back this fall. This time we will go back to the single weekend format, featuring a home football game against our arch foes in the league, the York Lions. Which brings me right back to where I started with the revitalized Richardson Stadium. Now, before I wrap things up and take a few questions, I did want to offer a very sincere thanks to all of you who offer up your time as volunteers. Organizations like Queen's plan and host all kinds of events that simply wouldn't be possible without the generous help that you provide, whether it's Queen's reunions to branch events. I think the list is pretty extensive, and I see that when I go out to branch events, whether here in Kingston or in Calgary or in Vancouver or many other places. This very event would not have taken place without the tremendous support of a group of very capable volunteers, particularly the Alumni Volunteers on the AVS committee, led by Jeremy Mosher. So, also very, very glad to have several of our university council members together. The two bodies are virtually coterminous in their membership, both by definition, both Queen's alumni are members, and it's good to have them having a little bit more interaction than perhaps we've had in the past. So I do hope you enjoy the rest of the summit, and sure I'll see many of you in the course of this evening. Happy to take questions.
Just before we get to the questions, I just thought, thank you.
Thank you.
So Wolff, that's fantastic, and I look forward to, I think we all look forward to your second term. It's going to be very exciting to start accounting for all the things that are going on, and it's going to be opened in the 175th. It's going to be a place that you want to be at and associated with, and this should prove well for the folks in the branches and for our alumni and for folks here in Kingston. So questions for Principal Wolff. Marcus.
Principal Wolff, at QUA we're always talking about that transition point of when students become alumni, that sort of that nebulous change. And I noticed that there seems to be a growing gap between what I would say the expectations of the administration of the university and that of student leaders with things that are somewhat contentious, shall we say. Frosh Week, homecoming, things like that. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on how do we bridge that gap? Because certainly I understand the need to balance the huge liabilities, but also, what students feel is, shall we say, their entitlements, wrongly perhaps, rightly, I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll park entitlement, which is not a word I'm particularly comfortable with. I would maybe use the word their heritage in terms of student participation. And it's a timely question, Marcus. In fact, I spent most of this morning writing a blog, which should go up sometime next week, on this very issue, a bit of a response to a recent AMS op-ed that some of you will have read. It's it's no secret that there have been some tensions between administration and student leadership this year. I think those have been over a relatively small range of issues. I think the challenges, the issue of managing risk and preserving health and safety. Many of you will remember that 3 years ago, we had a just terrible year here. We had, of course, a number of suicides, and we've approached that issue from a different vantage point, that of mental health. But apart from the suicides, we also had 2 students dying from falls, both incurred while under the influence of alcohol. We have far more underage students than we used to have because of the end of grade 13. And we're also a lot larger than we used to be. So it's a delicate balancing act. On the one hand, I completely get the Queen's tradition of non-academic discipline, student autonomy in government. It is very much part of that distinctive experience. But it also has to be balanced with caution around reasonable risk. Life has risk. I mean, as I'll say in my blog, if I get into my car, I'm incurring a risk. If I get into my car and I haven't checked the brakes or I've got headlights that aren't working, then I've put in a different level of risk that is unnecessary and not particularly helpful. We take risks when we put our sports players on a field, but we also work to manage that risk so that people who aren't fit don't play, appropriate equipment is worn, and so forth. So it's not about eliminating risk, it's about managing risk. The thing that I think was perhaps a little bit tense this year is we did have some reports of hazing activities in the wake of Frosh Week. And this is, an inclusive and open environment, and I don't think hazing is something we want to be known for. where you draw the line and what's hazing and what isn't can be a bit gray, but I think some of the things that were being reported to us by parents go beyond the line of what would be deemed either tolerable or safe, or that we would want our alma mater to be associated with. So, as I said a couple of times, we have all the initiative, all the activity we want, and we do need to be careful and mindful, and I'm always talking with our student affairs people about making sure we're not too mum and popish about this, but all the initiative in the world will not do you any good if you're dead. And I don't mean to be that blunt about it, but I never want to be in a position again where I have to call a parent and say, your son just fell out of a window at Victoria Hall. And I'm sorry that sounds a little bit crisp, but that's the challenge, is balancing that interest, and it's never perfect. It's a bit of a give and take. I'm looking forward to working with next year's AMS executive to continue to work through these issues. But thank you very much for that question.
Another question?
I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more. You called it the quintessentially balanced academy.
Right.
That sounds very scholarly. What is your vision there?
To bring balance to the force. I mean, this is the point where I say, I find your lack of faith disturbing. Very, very simply, that's also a really good question. Basically, there are 4 types of universities in the world, and in Canada in particular, and you can put them all on a 4-square quadrant. And there are those that do not very well in research and not very well on their student engagement scores. There are those who do really well on student engagement, but don't particularly perform well on research. Then there are those that do brilliantly on research, and but the undergraduate experience particularly, not so much. And there's a select number of universities in the upper right quadrant of this imaginary graph that do both. And that's actually a hard place to stay. It'd be much easier to say, okay, we're going to gut our undergraduate courses and reduce everybody's teaching load further and give people more time for research so that we can move up in the international rankings and compete with McGill and Toronto and Alberta in terms of gross dollar volume on research. Or we could go the other way and say, nope, our core is the undergraduate experience. We're going to up the course load, lower our research expectations, and become a little bit more of a Mount Allison or something like that. We're a little big for that, but I don't think that's a direction we want to go. I think one of our strengths is that we are in that upper right quadrant. That's the balance. And like any balance, it's a tightrope. It's tough. It's not precise. You're always holding this virtual pole. Do I put more money over here into teaching positions or more money over here onto the research side? But that's the balance. I also think there's another balance, as I mentioned, in terms of the in-class and the out-of-class experience as well. So that's what I mean by balance. Other questions?
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we have to keep the.
Is this the hook?
That's the hook. No.